Hi, welcome to How I Became a Theosophist. It's a little program we do out of the Henry S. Olcott Memorial Library to promote community. We're very fortunate right now to have the Summer National Conference going on, so we're able to have a few guests who don't live in the area, and so I'm really happy and grateful to have Maria Parisen as our guest today. Thank you for doing this.
You're welcome.
So, Maria, I don't think you need an introduction, but could you tell or briefly summarize how you came to Theosophy?
Well, my mother was a Theosophist, although I didn't know it at the time. We had a very open household where when we talked about things like religion or the meaning of life or approaching everyday problems, things were very open, and it was I was raised in the Roman Catholic Church, but there was a tolerance for other faiths, so that that was a sort of part of my upbringing.
Yeah.
We never had philosophical discussions or anything of depth, but there was an openness, a kind of practical approach to life. And when I went away to college, I took with me one book from my mother's small library, and that was Paul Brunton's The Quest of the Overself. That was a kind of an open door for me into the world of a universal way of looking at religion and life, and the whole quest for something greater than myself or than anything I had imagined before. So I remember reading that book at least a couple of times, and then I would, for the first time, I remember going down into the recreation room in the dormitory where I was living, and in the pre-dawn hours I would go and sit, and it was a kind of meditation.
Yeah.
I only knew that I needed to be alone, and that there was something that needed to happen in that silent space. I had no idea, I still don't, what was going to happen, and of course nothing major did, except it began a kind of disciplined listening to what my own inner self was wanting, and a willingness to experiment a little.
Yeah. And this is when you went away to college, you said?
Yes.
And so then, did you, say, shortly after college, formally join a group, or was it still, as far as like, how did you then become, not that it matters, but officially sort of part of the Theosophical Society and
Yeah. Well, it was after my husband and I were married.
Okay.
By that time, I had left the Roman Catholic Church over some differences about raising children and what was required of us in about having children and so forth. And it just didn't feel like a fit anymore.
Yeah.
And my husband and I were married in the Episcopal Church, and then and he was also very open. We went to church occasionally, but I was, although I didn't realize it at the time, I was feeling somewhat disconnected in between a space of having a faith tradition and not, almost like floating. And then by that time we had moved from the Cleveland area, where I was born and raised, to Detroit, where my husband was working for General Motors. And Mom called from Cleveland and said that there were a couple of national lecturers coming through Detroit, and she thought we might be interested. So we went, these lecturers, they were spotlight workers, Eunice and Felix Layton, and they were in town for 5 days. Each night they would give a different talk, and it was in a hotel ballroom downtown. It was packed.
Wow.
So we went down each night, and it was fine. You know, we were both very open to the ideas. The lectures were clear. There was no pushing. And Mom had told us a couple of folks that we might want to connect with in the group, which we did. And we ended up joining a small study center in Pontiac, which is about an hour outside the city. And it was memorable, that group. Well, all of the groups I belong to have been memorable, but that one was young families with, there were a lot of babies running around and being held, and elders also. It was a small group, but a wonderful mixture. And I felt immediately at home there. And the questions were great. The ideas we discussed were new and interesting. And then we discovered after a couple of meetings that everyone was vegetarian in the group. And that was really a revelation for us. We questioned and listened and felt like that was who we were.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was not even like much of, it was like stepping into who you really are, like taking off a heavy coat that you've outworn it and it's gone. And there was just no problem assimilating to this group, and yet there was no pressure from them. That's just nice. A kind of happiness, you know.
Sounds like a perfect scenario.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes around here at the National Center, we wonder about trying to make sort of a youth drive. We wonder, can we attract teenagers or people in their 20s or early 30s? And I wonder, do you think maybe we're getting the question wrong? Do you think maybe it's out of our hands? And maybe we shouldn't, quote unquote, try to appeal to a certain demographic and just let the cycle play itself out naturally? Because it sounds like your situation for who you were just happened organically. And if anybody had tried to force anything on you or sell you something, you would have been turned off, maybe. So do you have any advice for us when we start when we start wondering about should we try to attract teenagers and people in their 20s, or should we just let it happen on its own? Or
I think what we're doing right now, getting things out onto the internet, is most important.
Okay.
And then really our own members will be the best ambassadors.
That's a good point.
Because we're out and about, we're very service oriented, and wherever we go, there will be opportunities. I think one of the most important things is to be aware of the opportunities all around for moving into this or that line of service. One of the things that will, I think, be most important is when our own members, each one becomes sufficiently trusting of the inner life that's wanting to unfold, that they will find themselves in all kinds of situations spontaneously where connections, the needed connections, will be made. And this is not anything like proselytizing. It's actually just being who you are and serving those in need. And those who are in need, who are searching, and there are more and more who are looking for a more open, inquiring way of life, disciplined and yet still spontaneous and creative, focused and yet absolutely open and free. Enough who are looking for that kind of life that they will find us. Our work here at the national headquarters, for example, is to reach out and make the best possible use of the web.
Okay.
And we're doing that.
Right.
In Crotona, where I live and work, the energy is quite different.
Okay.
We don't have that strong internet presence. It's not our work at the moment, but we have more of a retreat atmosphere, more of a one-on-one and small classroom atmosphere, which influences inquirers in a different way. So if each of us as a collective and as individuals begin to trust our sense of where we're needed most, where our strengths are needed most, where we're the most joyful, I think, then what's needed the connections will be made. I really trust in all of this, and trust that the holy ones who are behind this work, evolution is on our side. We're involved in a lineage that is enormously powerful, and will not be stopped. This openness, this ecumenical energy, the quest for truth, the honesty about who we are and where we're going, that cannot be stopped. So we can trust that process.
And this openness and trust, which seems to underlie your talks that I've gone to, and it seems to be that's the primary message that's coming through. Is this something that that has evolved in you, that has grown, or is it something maybe you were born with, or does that have to do with your family upbringing? I mean, because you seem to be natural at it, at being open to and trusting to the universe and to the guides and.
Well, there's something that might have been there since childhood. I remember having a little altar in my bedroom, and it overlooked a big old maple tree, and I used to kneel there to pray in the evening, and I used to love the Roman Catholic ritual. I used to go to church with my dad to a seminary, and loved the sound of the male choir. There's something in me which loves ceremony, which loves ritual, which loves the richness of symbolism. And I was a very obedient child. I didn't, when my mom or dad said something, I was not the rebel. I really listened, and if what they were saying seemed like it was not going to make a big difference in my life, I went along with it and was never sorry. I trusted, let me say this is interesting, your question, because I trusted in the elders. I had no real desire to rebel. And right on through college, I trusted in the process and did what I felt I needed to do to stay within the work that I was doing, and that was in nursing, both undergraduate and graduate. I got pulled into some things, exposed to some things during graduate school, especially studies in anatomy and physiology in the medical school, that really shocked me out of my trust in the process. And that was the required experiments on animals. When I saw that, something in me was absolutely repulsed. I couldn't, and I had been involved in these, and I had even been a leader on my dissection team. I was proud of my efficiency, if you can imagine. Imagine. I can't even look back on it now without wondering, where was my mind? I was trusting the wrong thing. All of a sudden, I was shocked into an awareness that there was something wrong there. There was a disconnect between something in my soul and something that I was required to do. And there was something wrong with the whole process there, that you could imagine that you could forward health and healing by the needless sacrifice of sentient creatures. That was at the heart of it. You could not advance yourself by causing unnecessary suffering. And I knew that the experiments that I was required to do were redundant. They were useless. Most students didn't even attend. I did because I was obedient
I see.
And
So sorry. Sorry.
and even the attitude of some of my fellow students, I was shocked. They were casual. They were making fun. They were not paying attention, and a life was being lost. So that was, I think that might have been a kind of turning point where I began to trust something inside, and finding the Theosophical Society where a certain kind of life was being lived by this little group. That I realized that it was my life they were living, and I needed to step into it.
Yeah, yeah.
That was the thing.
Yeah. You've basically answered this question already, but we get asked all the time. I get asked personally, so what is Theosophy? And I get asked by a lot of different audiences, different types of people. So, could you talk a little bit about, first of all, just sort of in the John Elgio sense, what does that concept mean to you, divine wisdom, Theosophy, and then also maybe how, I think you've already answered it, but how it affects your everyday life?
For me, Theosophy is, it's beginning to grow into an amazing experience that is, that leaves me filled with a kind of, a combination of frustration, because it is, as the idea of divine wisdom, I know that it is, in a way, well beyond anything that I can grasp with this everyday mind of mine. And yet, at the same time, with that frustration and sense of being in a kind of self-made boundary, limitation, a kind of prison, there is this enormous happiness with the idea that that in this moment there is something so much more. There is an ability to perceive in a clear and direct way the essence of our relationship. I mean, the possibility, Amit Goswami talked this morning about possibilities. The possibility of you and I being in a relationship that is so simple and open and honest that there are no barriers between what we can be for one another, that we can be together in a way that is fully accepting. We can be our very different selves with a very different past, perhaps, and maybe a future that diverges, and yet always kin, always family, always mindful of each other and the wider life that is enfolding us. I think for me, Theosophy is a way of being in the present moment that is so completely open to the possibility of transformation, and it's living in a moment that is wanting to be healing, wanting to be whole, and opening to that possibility.
Could you talk a little bit about what healing means to you? And does it mean being whole to you?
It does mean coming into moment by moment.
Yeah.
A trusting of your own innermost nature, and a trusting that whatever is happening in the physical body is part of the life that needs to be lived in the moment. It's also trusting that whatever resources we might need for moving through difficult and even ecstatic moments that those resources are nearby. Because even a joyous moment, an ecstatic or creative moment, can turn into something that is unhealthy.
Oh.
When the mind, as it always does,
Yeah.
jumps in with all kinds of opinions and
Yeah.
analysis and so forth, and takes away the sense of amazement, then you begin to imagine that you have experienced something, and all of the joy is damped down into something linear and explainable, and the mystery is gone. So there's always the danger of not catching the significance, the meaning, the joy in a dark situation, and on the other hand, of pulling the light down to something foggy and muddy.
How would you recommend, especially to those of us who are newer, that we balance the incredible offerings intellectually that Theosophy has to offer, right? There's so much great literature, for example, but it does seem like if there's something even deeper than that, maybe that we're being pulled to. So how do we balance this heartfelt sense that you've been embracing today in your talk with all of this really challenging technical, intellectual information that we have, and it's sort of there.
It is there.
Yeah.
And it is wonderful that it's there.
Yeah.
I've always been an eager student. The curse in my younger years, and it's still within me a little bit, but thank God damped down a little, was the competitiveness. I was always a competitive student and hard on myself.
Yeah.
But I love the challenge of the Mahatma letters to me, the secret doctrine to ponder. I think one of the keys is not to allow yourself to get pulled into too much of the intellectual, indulge the joy in the study, but also balance it with times of silence, with times of assimilation, and bringing to it also, I think it was Madame Blavatsky who suggested, or maybe even one of the adepts, I think it might have been in the Mahatma letters, to come fresh to something that is drawing you, especially if it's difficult material, and leave aside everything that you have learned in the past, and come into it in the same relationship that you and I have in sitting here together, as you would be sitting with a friend, and allow yourself to engage the material not only with the intellect, with the reasoning mind, which is there to help, but also to try to sense into the essence of it and to sit with it, and not to move too quickly through things and imagine that amassing knowledge is what we're here for, because that's not the key. It's to allow ourselves to be drawn into the experience of a difficult piece of material, and to live with it, not to imagine that we're going to solve it, to understand it, but somehow it becomes something living that begins to inform our lives. And that's true even when we're beginning, for example, with the secret doctrine, and we encounter the idea of darkness which is very deep, and yet something is moving in it, and the dawn is coming. I mean, this is an experience that we have every day. When we rise in the early morning hours and things are dark and the mind is silent, and then little by little the sun comes up and things come into view, and all of a sudden we begin to engage in a new way. There's nothing in the secret doctrine or even in the Mahatma letters that we're not living moment by moment in our everyday lives, and that's where the connection comes. The Theosophy is intended to be a living wisdom. It guides our life from the inside out. So we're almost like bees and we're taking the nectar, which is what we need for our high level metabolism. we are in the inner worlds, taking in and discharging enormous energy, just like the hummingbird or the bee that has a high level of metabolism and needs a constant, rich source of nourishment. That is ourselves in the inner world. And that's what we take from this energy-rich material on the cosmos and the inner nature of the human being. That's a very high-level energy material, and we have to engage it with a silent, open, fresh mind in order that there be a real exchange.
Sometimes I hear that the personality, as it were, ultimately does not matter. Yet, how do we balance the idea of compassion for other personalities and for our own personality with the idea that our personality is so ephemeral and that it do you think it has an ultimate significance, or is it just a vehicle? The sort of person that we become in this incarnation.
The thing that will pass out, the peripheral sense, is the sense of separateness. If the personal self is enmeshed in its own separateness, its own needs and satisfactions, then there's an obstacle. But the real individuality that even now is working through the personal self does not die.
Yeah.
That sense of individuality, that sense of the spiritual self, will remain, will become a part of, and even now is a part of the spiritual soul. So that that's the whole source of compassion, is that innermost self inside. The voice of the silence, for example, has that beautiful phrase, "Let thy soul lend its ear to every cry of pain." Like as the lotus bears its heart to drink the morning sun, there's something in us that actually seeks out and needs to see and experience imbalance in order to bring renewal or refreshment to it. So it's the soul itself deep within us that's responding to need. And the personal self is shadowy in these moments of compassion and love. It's the real individuality, the spiritual self, that's making itself felt. When you and I are together, and we feel a need in the other, and we're here and responding to that need, there's no sense of separateness. There's no sense of one being healed and the other being a healer. There's only something that goes on between the two of us that nourishes us both. So the personal self is a beautiful thing, and only its sense of separateness will gradually die. It will perish. And in its place we will be, as we have always been, something whole.
You have already answered this question. I've got a long tape. So, you've basically answered this, but let's say there's somebody brand new. We get new people coming in here all the time and just kind of wondering, and they'll maybe go to a meeting, and sometimes we see them again, sometimes not. So, do you have any advice to somebody who's brand new to Theosophy and to this society about how to approach it?
I think letting yourself be drawn, first of all, understanding, why it is that we've been drawn in this direction, what it is that is the attraction, the attractor, what has brought us to this point, not in a way of analyzing, but simply being observant. What has brought us into this atmosphere of the Theosophical Society? and then allowing ourselves naturally to be drawn to those individuals and to that material that seems to be a fit. Not thinking that we have to go in this direction or not. When someone joins, they're given the new members' letters, which offer a wide arena for inquiry, and so that we can move in any one of a number of directions, and for our own inquiry and study, and then also being alert to where we're needed. What is there something that's going on in this group or in this organization as a whole where I can offer something of myself, where I can begin to interact in a way that draws on my creative life. And that can happen even if one is in a prison, for example. We have prisoners who are new members and beginning to explore these ideas. And the other day I was looking at some paintings that were submitted by someone from who is an inmate, and they're being donated to the Theosophical Order of Service for its little sale at the Theosophist in a couple of months. They were amazing. And what a gift. So here we have an individual who is a relatively new member, and he's involved in the study, and he's given something of himself to the society, and already enriching the collective that is working together in looking into authenticity, what it means to be honest, what it means to give of oneself. All of that is a part of our work together. So my sense is, in the little Theosophical group that I first joined, I was pulled in immediately into doing certain things. Some of them were beyond my reach. Yes, but you learn, and especially this was true when that little group folded and we all joined a bigger lodge down in downtown Detroit. Then there was lots to be done, and I was pulled forward almost immediately to give some talks, and so I had no experience along those lines. But you do what's needed. You want to be of help, and you have certain skills, and you say, well, that's beyond my reach at the moment, but I think I can fit in, and so you do. So it's in the giving that we also, it's in the giving that we receive what we need. It's a circulation of energies.
Great, that's a great answer. So now this is final question, and just about our society. What would be your perfect case scenario for our society in the future? Let's say in the next 15, 20, 25 years, what would be the ideal growth, or maybe growth is the wrong word, but the situation of the society, or does that even matter to look at it in those terms?
I think it is important, and what I've never thought so much about that question, but what I see now that's needed is a balance of an inward movement into our own consciousness, and then an outward movement into community. So I feel as though members of the Theosophical Society are almost, I would say, responsible for trying to have a sense of what sort of path they wish to follow, and to begin to have, I hate to use the word disciplined, but I will use it. There needs to be a rhythm in our lives, a going inward with some seriousness and openness, and then a going outward. And that needs to inform all of our lives. in the words of the conventional religion, it would be a prayerful life. It would be a life of contemplation and meditation, and a serious attempt to understand what those mean, and then an energetic and fearless acceptance of what life brings. Because anytime we begin to go more inward and offer ourselves to something larger, we are required to then to face what is needed in the world around us. And that means taking on the challenges that are inherent in community, in family, in relationships. And that will inevitably bring discomfort, because as soon as we begin to move inward, seriously into the life of prayer and meditation, the whole organism begins to reorganize itself around a different center, a center that is less personally engaged and more engaged with a flow of life that we could even call impersonal. It's even more individual and mindful of diversity, but it is not centered around the desires of a limited consciousness. It's opening itself up to a greater need, greater potential within, a greater sense of inner resource, a greater faith in the transcendent. At the same time, an enormously growing faith in our brothers and sisters, and in the resources available to us in nature, in other kingdoms, and in life itself, in all of its movements. So I see us with a better balance in each membership, in each member, and in each collective, a better balance of inward and outward movement, and a real ability to tackle the difficult material we've been given, and also a lighter carrying of the load. So that there is an easy incorporation of the arts, of music, of dance, of play, of drama, which you love. A greater willingness to embrace life in all of its wholeness and to bring our full self to participate.
Yep. Okay, I'll sign that.
Me too.
So I just want to say thank you.
Oh, you are
so
most
much.
welcome, and I am so grateful for those who will be listening, who will be watching, and come to Crotona, and come to Olcott, and be a part of these gatherings in which this is taking place. Even come to it almost as though you might come to a pilgrimage. And the same is for our camps, Indralaya, Far Horizons, Pumpkin Hollow, the Ozarks. Participate and be a part of the bigger picture.
Thank you.
Thank you.